Previous chapters spoke of my arrival at new shores. In this one, I hope to describe navigation of these new lands. Due to the complexity of the Terra Occulta, there may be overlap with the ideas of others, and if so, it is accidental. In short, this chapter is an encouragement to remain free in one's thought. It is for those who, by virtue of their nature, prefer independence and desire an alternative to codified praxis, to pro-establishment traditions. The ideas presented are the map I use when navigating the philosophical continent while prioritizing openness, empiricism, and autonomy. There is a requirement for such a map, since the territory is confusing at best and misleading at worst, and like any landscape, is not without danger. I hope there is freedom for each to find their place and to be enchanted without pressure to conform or being required to identify with an established group or a codified philosophy. Sorry I haven't been on here for a while, but it's probably been a lot more than a year now since I started the project, but my hair situation hasn't been ideal, and so I didn't want to be on video. But yeah, I really do want to finish what I started in terms of revisiting the stuff that I wrote, analysing it with, in hindsight and having continued to learn. And we got about halfway before, and so there's only really 3 or 4 chapters left, and they're going to get done in due course. It just might take some time. And so this time we're going to look at the chapter Terra Occulta, which I just read the first little paragraph or 2 from, just to give a little flavour of what it's about. And after looking at it again, this one's quite a good one to have waited a while to talk about, and my thoughts have developed a fair bit in some interesting directions with regards to that chapter. So I'll try and fit it all in. To have a bit of structure, I think first I'll go over what I wrote so that I can analyse it and add to it. So what it was about, what it mostly was about, it's the 3rd chapter in the book. And like I said, the first 2 chapters were just sort of describing this new type of outlook, where it comes from, the research I'd done into it. This chapter was mostly coming from a place of kind of experience. I guess in hindsight it sounds a little bit like something any paranoid schizophrenic would write, just a very suspicious appraisal of the people that I'd come across, and some of the shared criticisms, some of the things that philosophy is criticized for. I am also on board with a lot of those criticisms. And like the title of the chapter, Terra Occulta, which means like hidden land, talking specifically about the occult. Yeah, that one specifically, that kind of domain specifically, I think a lot of the grievances are completely legitimate. A lot of the suspicions, I mean, like I said, I'm suspicious anyway, but I think a lot of the suspicions are quite legitimate. However, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So let's have a bit of a look at some of these criticisms, So, like I said, I want to navigate the philosophical continent while prioritizing openness, empiricism, and autonomy. And the first one there, I guess, in hindsight, like openness, I do not want to completely be naively open. And that is what this chapter goes on to kind of offer a solution to, being naive. And the empiricism and autonomy, I think, are both very legitimate, though. Like autonomy, in another way, I think, is a form of like being liberated, which tantric traditions and the left-hand path and things like that are there for, and they probably actually had that effect on me in the first place. So these two categories here, empiricism and autonomy, are things that I learned. They were probably new, kind of novel traits or aspirations that I'd come across through my reading and experience. And empiricism is, I think, what I meant looking back on that is to be loyal to the kind of phenomenology, which I still really appreciate. And I could have a lot to say about phenomenology and what's so great about it. Yeah, just I think in recent times, like must have even been happening while I was writing this book, because I went on a bit of a rant in my first video about science. To an extent that it was a bit unfair, probably, and probably not going to like make a whole amount of friends, especially people who are scientists. And I learn a lot from scientists, but I think there's a tendency with those people to not look at the evidence, like to the point that it's absurd, to the point where sometimes you hear them say things like, well, there's just defeatist statements that come out of scientists' mouths that are so defeatist that they almost are like gaslighty. They'd rather have people live under their theory than accept things which were just blatantly self-evident to anyone who didn't have a strong theory, That's what phenomenology is there for, really, is saying, look, like, I don't have a big developed theory, but this happened, and I'm going to look into it. I just don't like the prejudice that says, well, I wasn't there, but for me to make sense of it in terms of what I study, I have to kind of like not take you at your word. And but those, I'm going off tangent now, because those aren't the people that this chapter was aimed at. This chapter was aimed at, it was aimed at something big that I'll get to in a bit, I suppose. So theoretically, I go on to talk about the distinction between episteme or episteme and catechism, which is like another word for doctrine, really. It's a word for like instructions. Whereas episteme is like a science of knowledge. It's that's what it's become in modern philosophy. Like epistemology means studying the principles of knowledge, like the kind of machinery and the different types of machinery that human beings are kind of loyal to. The vehicles of knowledge. There's different types. There's intuitive knowledge. There's a priori knowledge, things that you know before anyone needs to tell you how you know it. There's a posteriori knowledge, which is like things that you can only have knowledge of by extension, that you have to like, you have to know other things before you can know that. They don't, it's not like breathing, you know, you don't need to be taught how to breathe, but you do need to be taught about South America if you're from Europe. You know, that would be a posteriori knowledge. But epistemology comes from an earlier word in Greek, episteme, which just means like a type of knowledge. It's like things that you know through study. So I wanted to separate the difference between being a spirit in the spiritual world, in the philosophical world, and in the occult world. What is the difference between things that you can study and know versus things that aren't really things that you know, but are things that you're told? And that's huge if you're getting into spirituality and stuff, because, for example, all organized religion is mostly catechism. And in fact, some of the highest, most kind of exalted statements in most organized religions will never be episteme, because they theoretically can't be. Especially dualistic religions. Like, you're never going to meet a God that's completely transcended until after you die. So you just have to take someone's word for it. Unless you have a mystical experience, maybe. But either way, I, in this chapter, made quite a bold commitment to not put too much into things that people can tell me, and to stay loyal to study and the types of spiritual sort of the spiritual categories, or the spiritual elements of life that are actually knowable, whatever that means. If you want to be an epistemologist, you know. Obviously my book's got Gnosis in the title, so I'm open to all sorts of, you know, I'm not ruling out everything that can't be quantified. I do believe that intuition is a legitimate route to knowing things. And there's dangers to that, and I think that that's more than obvious to everyone. A lot of people don't want anything to do with it because of the dangers of it. And I think it's a strange prejudice that people will think that about intuitive knowledge, or about, you know, a kind of a spiritual knowledge, but they rarely have that suspicion of scientific knowledge, like quantifiable knowledge. And to be honest, if you want to get into it, that's been more dangerous. There's dangers all over the place in what you can do with technical knowledge. So yeah, it's the sign of our times, though. It's just, you know, everything's got its historical dominant, like Jung would call it. You know, the way of working that is natural to it, and ours at the moment is just being totally skeptical of everything apart from quantifiable knowledge, and that's okay. But you know, for the more kind of curious among us, I've got this chapter out here where I'm exploring the alternatives, and it's important for people when they're reading to know the difference between something you can get to know and something that is you can't get to know. It's just being told to you. I can't tell you everything about how to do that, but I recommend that you dwell on it and think about it for a minute. I use an example from yoga to outline the difference, and I don't mean to be harsh to yoga. I just thought it was a good example where, you can get involved in it. It's literally called like a practice, and it largely starts out as pure doctrine, but because you're practicing it, you can then weigh up for yourself, like, yeah, okay, like I kind of get that bit about it. I can see what's of value here, and then there's other bits where you're like, nah, I can't really see what's of value to that, or this particular guy sees this in a totally different way to me, like he's way too fundamentalist about what you can achieve with yoga. But still though, through hanging out with him and through his yoga instruction, you may gain a real kind of tranquility, and that's a beautiful thing. And you go, wow, yeah, I know that now. I just don't know about all the other stuff. I personally can interpret a lot of the stuff about prana and the Kundalini and stuff. My personal interpretation of it is it's real after I've kind of rationalized it a certain amount, and some of what people say about it I just am not fully on board with. And so I made my own personal kind of delineation of the teachings, and to be honest, that's what Tantra has been for a long time. So I'm just being normal in that. I'm not being kind of like, I'm not doing anything new. That's how yoga and how Tantra has been, and how the whole kind of Vedic world and the Buddhist world has always been. It's a lot of finding different ways to skin a cat. But the thing is, I think a kind of a more skeptical person would see that as the machinations of power, that this is usurping the religion by kind of, aspiring like new leaders and stuff. They need to twist it their way. They need to put their own new spin on it to give themselves like a chance of having their own religion and taking the power that religion provides and stuff. And I don't know about that. That's not the way I see it. It's obviously not the way like lots of people see it, because they wouldn't participate in those changes unless I'm just completely naive. But maybe on the really cynical end of the spectrum, it's all those conversions are just allegiances to certain people, but I don't think so. These guys would have to be so clever to be writing like the Rig Veda. Do you know what I mean? Just to legitimize their power. It's like it's the longest poem in the world. It's like 20,000 pages or something. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but like that would be wild to just do that. Just like, and still see that cynically, that someone doesn't actually like that. That's not got someone's kind of passion in. I don't know. And there was just another chapter after that example, really, just talking about remaining hermetically open, which is obviously a play on being hermetically closed. Being open to the forms of hermetic knowledge. It's quite an interesting topic in itself, because the traditional hermetic forms of, the hermetic arts alchemy, astrology, magic. If you see those like a child does, or like a Hollywood movie would portray them, then you're obviously going to like rule them out. They obviously don't. There's nothing in the world like those things. You know, there's not immortal alchemists. There's not Harry Potters. The chances of them are very small, at least. You know, like I can't say I've seen everything, but I'm pretty certain they're not there. So you can close yourself off from having any further participation in that discourse. But what I'm suggesting is stay a little bit open, you know. Go and actually read some source texts, maybe. Don't rely on Hollywood. Just stay a little bit open. And maybe people have been doing things in such a different way for so long, you know, that me as a little wage worker that lives in like a weird kind of like distracted age, like maybe I don't know as much as I think, and maybe some of these people who like became world famous or like influenced emperors, like maybe they actually did know something, you know, like maybe we should look at their achievements and judge them and then look at what they said, rather than the other way around. Like look at what they said, compare it to like my prejudices and then judge them. That is what I think most people do. And you don't, you know, it's a closed way of relating to this hermetic knowledge. And you can't learn with a closed mind. And I've learned huge amounts. I've learned huge amounts that a lot of people just want nothing to do with as well. But I've learned huge amounts of stuff that people still want to know about. You know, I have chats with people that I wouldn't have been able to have 10 years ago. And they don't want anything to do with astrology or magic. But yeah. Pardon me. I think the reason they don't want anything to do with astrology or magic is because people aren't exercising enough suspicion, and the hermetic arts and things like that are often recruiting compulsive liars and transgressive people, and that's a huge like psychological slant to the thing that is a bit beyond me for right now, because I have something else I want to say, probably more importantly. But it's a shame really, because the occult has become synonymous with like transgressive people and liars, like transgressive compulsive liars, when it's a lot more than that. And it's so much easier to lie about stuff that you can't see. Like, it's, you know, the occult is hidden, and if it's hidden, then when someone tries to get to know it, they're really vulnerable to like a certain type of exploitation, and that exploitation is legit. It's out there. I don't think I've fallen victim to it, and I know other people, they don't seem to fall victim to it. So I think there is a genuinely safe way to practice it, but there's also a history of people who've been, you know, cast asunder, and so that leads quite nicely into how my thoughts have developed on this chapter, actually, which is, on looking back at it, I realise now that I was grappling with a bigger topic, which is wisdom. And the reason wisdom is important is because how do you know what to do? That's something people struggle with, and it's something that defines Hermeticism in a way which I've not heard a huge amount of people say plainly, although it's definitely there because, like, the goddess Sophia is like kind of a manifestation of it, and she's hidden, really. She's there, but the importance of her is hidden. And I think the reason she's important, having listened to other philosophers in different schools, like more psychological Freudian schools and in like Hegelian schools, and definitely in like Hobbesian type stuff, philosophers of like politics and that. I think it's one of the things that thinkers end up coming a cropper on. They can analyse till the cows come home. They can keep breaking down structures, finding origins of behaviours and like Foucault type, like genealogies of thought and history and blah blah blah, and you keep analysing stuff and you break it down so much that if anyone was to say to you like, okay, well, what should we do then? Sometimes like their only answer is like, well, whatever you want, basically, because it's all a disaster. And if they don't say that, they say things like, I heard one the other day that was, someone said like, if you follow philosophy to its natural end, you either find salvation at the foot of the cross or like the barrel of a shotgun. And those are two really bad outcomes. And then what he was implying was like, and the third is like, you just got to like tough it out. That was, he didn't want you to do either of those things. He was kind of implying like, if you keep pushing on, you can have a bad end. So just tough it out. Well, I am toughing it out. And it seems that there's more to it. There's definitely more to it. I have an interest in what else there might be to it, actually, yeah. And people have come to ignore the kind of Latin title of like philosophia, like love of wisdom. Is that Latin? It might be Greek, but either way, like it's supposed to be the love of wisdom, and the love of wisdom tradition has got to the point where it's saying there isn't any advice. Like, we can keep telling you more and more details about things, but either like join the church or be a nihilist. And I think that's one of the things that I grappled with in that chapter, is giving advice, to myself, really. And then it dawned on me a couple of years later, like, that is practicing the authentic philosophy, you know, like I'm practicing wisdom. I'm sort of giving myself a lesson in what should I do that isn't being given to me from someone else. I don't have to be told that. I've found a source of it in myself and I'm writing it down now. And it was very only specific to what I was doing or where I was in that particular place and time. But it's a start. Yeah. Buddhism's another good one for wisdom, I think. A bit of an ignored side of the coin there. We don't really kind of call it philosophy. It's called a religion, but some of the tenets of Buddhism are pretty blatantly wise, you know. Always tend to the middle way. Don't go, you know, too far in either direction. I'm not like a flippant encyclopedia on Buddhist aphorisms, but I always do think that Buddhism is deeply wise. And in the more mystical way, there's reverence for like kind of similar figures to Sophia, although different flavors, you know, they have. This is the great thing about being involved in philosophy in the kind of more mystical stream, is like instead of just pushing aside gods themselves and looking at how it influences like society, like look at the gods themselves, you know, what's the difference between them? And yeah, I can't really talk too much about that right now, but that is one of the interesting things, that maybe in some ways all deities are expressions of wisdom. Although, you know, in Christianity there's a specific Sophia who has a very specific like position, relationship, because of all the other like things going on. In a way, like God, you know, Yahweh, he's a proponent of a certain kind of wisdom, but it's I guess in a way you could say he's not, because he's a patriarch and he dictates, and that doesn't really count as wisdom, you know. Sophia doesn't have any words out there. She hasn't got a book, but we know of her, and in a way maybe that, you know, that's kind of a possible interpretation, is that we deify the inner source of knowing what to do as a transpersonal thing, a goddess, you know. Although what you need to do is different to what I need to do, the source of that is the same. That's what a reverence of Sophia is for me. I think possibly others, who knows. And I don't call it Sophia, I call it wisdom. I don't think of it like that those exact terms, but that's one way that I could relate to it. Yeah, I do think that finding that source of knowing is a holy thing. Not knowing everything, but just having better hunches, having clearer insight, having better luck, you know, better ability to zig when you should have zagged. Like, these are all dimensions of an authentic wisdom. And in rereading the chapter and thinking over a couple of years, I have quite a strange source for that that project that I took on. And I've figured it out now. I've kind of delineated it. Hold on. I want to take a puff on this vape just to think about this. But It was a postmodern Marxist called Guy Debord who wrote a book that I read a long time ago, probably when I was about 19, called Société de le Spectacle, which is like Society of the Spectacle. And it was a cool book. I loved it for how like hard it was. It was so like conceptual and poetic and like aggressive and stuff. That it made me want to try and read it. But what I got from it has taken years to flower, you know, and blossom. And ironically, it blossomed in a completely different area, not into Marxism. I'm not hugely into like social criticism. I mean, obviously I am in like my day to day, but not in what I write a massive amount. That's maybe wrong actually, I probably am. But so what I could distill from it is his assessment is that the world is a circus. And why that's important is previously the world wasn't a circus. We had circuses somewhere else and the world was real. Life, we tended to things which he calls real. We tended to things that were the kind of prime materials. And I have to agree with him, although it's like it's getting into a political region that I'm not going to go any further with, but like because of capitalism, the circus grew and grew and grew. You know, it profits from our attendance, and so it finds clever ways to amplify our attendance. We want to go to the circus more and more. And by circus, what he really means is like a place you go to be passively entertained. You passively observe and are entertained and forgotten about the real things of life. You're not tending to your real life. You're just sitting watching someone else do their thing. In a way which is not just... It's not just community. Do you know what I mean? You're not going and giving someone else the floor in your community. You're just wasting time. What being pandered to in this kind of grandiose like spectacle. And he believes, and I agree with him, that what capitalism has done has supplanted reality with a circus. You can't get away from being entertained and being a passive observer. You to the point that you don't know you're in the circus. That's what his great thing is. He's like, you don't even know you're at the circus because the circus has taken over from the real. It did it like maybe 100 years ago. And now people are really different. They don't even know that they don't attend to the real. They're just tending to this. They're just being pleasantly entertained in a deeper way than Marx meant by like the opiate of the masses. It's deeper than that. It's like, it's almost Buddhist. It's like the actual real is gone. You're not being, you know, fed and watered and you're all good. It's had a spiritual effect on you that you don't, you know, until I read that book, I was like, whoa, I just never even thought about it. Like, maybe there's something else going on than all this entertainment. And how does that affect my relationship to myself? If I'm just constantly passively observing and being entertained and being told what's going on from there, like, what's that obstructing? The circus, the spectacle obstructs an authentic life because it consumes all your attention. And that chapter is the kind of flourishing of me wrestling with those ideas, because I knew I didn't want to be involved in the circus. It sounded quite scary and quite like a wasted life. But then I was like, well, what is real then? You know, you can't just step away from something and then immediately do something else. You might be another circus, which certain elements of spirituality, well, not certain elements, the whole of popular spirituality is an extension of that circus. It's just a spectacle. It's just people messing around, like dressing up and that. Where is the real? And there's quite a lot of answers to that. I think Guy Debord's answer to that is that where the real is in your attention to power, you know. It's capitalism which has turned this world into a circus. So it's capitalism that you need to take action against and reinstate the real. And that's what makes him a Marxist, really. Like, his answer is this circus has the intention of creating it is to stop you from being politically involved and from taking ownership of, you know, the means of production. That's what he thought. And I don't think he's right. I think that the circus is a construct. I do think it's very, like, particular. Our specific circus is particular to, like, America particularly, and like a lot of other things. But I don't think that the utility or the purpose of breaking free of it is just to break free from that specific circus. I think it's an extension of one of many distractions from Gnosis. You know, I think you can do politics, and that's cool, and you can do circuses as long as they don't take over the whole world, and that's cool. And you can do family life and legacy stuff and stuff like that, and they're all good, but it's when they obstruct, like what Jung would call like the self, you know, the ability for the self to exist. That's when you need to take action. And there's a whole domain of like study in that, which you could get into, and I think a lot of Hermeticism has been about that. You know, it's been about that. It's been about finding. It's been about getting rid of the obstructions from a deeper purpose, or from what you should do. You know, it doesn't work simply. You're not just going to find what you should do, like written down in like and on an A4 piece of paper in bullet points. That's probably why the circus is so easy to get, you know, to overwhelm you. It's because the alternative is a bit of a nightmare to deal with. So yeah, that's where that chapter comes from. Yeah, it's just, it was a piece of my search for formulating an idea of what we're supposed to do without being told. And so my answer to Guy Debord is, because he talks a lot about like the way he believes the circus exists as this kind of complete supplantation of like reality is in media, and what he means by media is like external images they don't come from you. They come from a guy who needs your attention, or who, you know, wants to pacify or modify, like the society or people. It's not a guy, obviously. Do you know what I mean? I'm being simplistic. It comes from a network outside of yourself. And my personal answer to Guy Debord is turn your attention towards inner representations, inner images, and dare I say it, because it's a nightmare, but there's an authentic world of image and representation which is being obstructed by these external forms. And I believe that in turning your attention to them, being receptive to them, having fidelity to what happens as a product of it and the process of doing it, you increase your authenticity. You have an authentically symbolic world instead of a spectacular symbolic world. And for me, that is a catalyst for knowing better what you should do. In other words, it's part of a process of wisdom making, like wisdom, living wisely. And because I haven't reached the end of it yet, I'm not at liberty to speak about what exactly it gets you. You know, it might not even be good, it might be bad, it might not be meaningful at all. However, just fuck the circus, basically. And, you know, I'm self-involved, I guess, in a way. And some of these philosophers would call that a symptom of a mental illness or whatever. Yeah, I've heard people say that. And good luck to him. No harm done then, is there? We don't have to argue with each other because they don't think I should be doing anything anyway. And I'm just, you know, thugging it out, doing wisdom. And yeah, so the takeaways are that chapter was a bit premature. I was actually working on other stuff. It took a couple other years to figure it out, but there's this big question about how to be, and about wisdom, and about our particular circumstance of being consumed by a circus, and about intuiting the importance of authentic symbol and an authentically symbolic world. And authenticity is a huge problem, and also what that symbolic world and wisdom leads to is still an unanswered question. But here we go. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care.